Welcome to Dialogue. For quite some time, the concept of harmony between man and nature influenced Chinese thinking, even architecture. But with modernity and globalization, has that changed? What influences do architects working in China draw upon today? How has Chinese architecture influenced Western architecture and vice versa? And what is the best way of preserving architectural heritage? To talk about those, in the first half of the program, I'm joined by Benjamin Wood, architect and founder of Studio Shanghai. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So let me start with a question about your work. Ben, you're the chief designer of Shanghai's Xintiandi district, and that neighborhood has become a fashionable landmark and also changed the way many of the similar buildings, the Shikumen homes, blend Chinese and Western styles, are valued. So why do you think Xintiandi is such a big success?
When I arrived in China in 1998, I literally arrived at the dawn of the meteoric rise of the middle class in the Middle Kingdom. And I had never been to China. And I arrived very late at night. And early the next morning, I walked what is now called Xintiandi. It was 2 city blocks of Shikumen. And I was astonished, actually, at the richness and diversity of the space, not the buildings themselves, but the space between the buildings. There were very narrow alleys, there were big, wider alleys that led to wider streets. And even though I was not a student of Chinese history, I realized almost immediately that there was something special, because I had just returned from a trip to Paris. And I'd seen the same terracotta decoration over some doorways in Paris. And I realized I was in the French concession. And I realized that the architecture was a fusion of both French architecture would have been adapted to Chinese tradition. In other words, the courtyard. So the Shikumen is basically a townhouse that has been adapted to the Chinese society, the cultural importance of having a courtyard.
What is the part that you see
as time went on, I learned a lot more about China,
for the local
even that
Chinese?
very first day, well, that 3-stone door and that small courtyard that you know, the Shikumen face south, as do all the buildings in Shanghai for sunlight purposes. But at the back, there's a kitchen, which was separated by a small airspace, because when the kitchens caught on fire, they didn't want the whole building to burn down. So there was a very definite hierarchy of moving from public to private. So as soon as you opened those 2 big wood doors, you were in private space, and then you were greeted at the courtyard. And so there's I didn't know this the first day, but I learned later that the Shikumen represents the courtyard house of the countryside taken into an urban environment. And it was built originally by speculators who wanted to sell homes. This is before the People's Republic of China was founded. So this is back in the turn of the 20th century, the early days. And originally very wealthy people lived in these homes. And of course, after the Republic of China was formed, things changed and more families moved in. But originally those were homes for very wealthy people. And the same way that people live in Paris and all the world cities, townhomes for wealthy people, but adapted to Chinese. In China, I've learned that the courtyard represents the sky, and the floor of the courtyard represents the earth. And That's actually how the name came about, Xintiandi.
And
Sky
did
and
you
earth.
realize that Shanghai
And,
was a
so
special
there's a lot of history,
city
but
because
what I really want to
it
tell
was
you,
one of the most open cities in the 19th century in China because of the colonization period?
you know, I didn't know it when the day I arrived, but within a couple of days, I had a really informed guide, and who told me the whole history of the Shukumen, and he was bilingual, and he knew some of the residents, so I actually got to talk to some of the people that were living there, and they had been living there for three or four generations, and so there were. I'll never forget one of the older guys, the oldest resident of that neighborhood. You know, he knew he was going to move, and he said, "I really hate to leave this neighborhood. This is part of my life."
Yeah.
And so I knew I knew exactly at that moment that I had an incredible responsibility to the city of Shanghai to make a place for people to celebrate being lifted out of poverty. And I've been through 3 presidents in China, you know, and also the Xintiandi site is where the first Congress of the Communist Party was.
Yes, exactly.
You know, it's called ETA, the
Yeah.
first Congress, and the anniversary of ETA, well, the anniversary of the PRC was coming up 3 years. When I arrived, it was 3 years before they were going to celebrate the People's Republic, and so that was a huge focus by the government, and they actually never envisioned a place like Xintiandi. They actually wanted to just make the whole place a museum.
Mm-hmm. But you
And I said,
changed
let's
all
not
that.
make it a museum. Let's make it part of culture. And culture's a living, yes. Well, actually, I'm probably more changed by Xintiandi than Xintiandi changed China, because it changed my whole life. And it's still changing my life.
But Ben, you know that Shanghai,
And,
as many other cities around the world, are facing the challenge of how to modernize its city, how to move on with new architectures that adapt to the local people's needs.
Well, in the case of China, you know, when I opened my office, I had to import a lot of people from Singapore who were Chinese-speaking architects, because locally it was difficult to find anybody. Not that the local architects weren't smart. They were very smart, but they had no experience of the world. They hadn't traveled. They didn't have passports. You know, back then in 1998, no one left China, and very few people even left to go to be educated. So I imported my first staff from Singapore, and then over the years, you know, 22 years later, I have about close to 30 people in my office, and I'm the only foreigner. So I started out with all foreigners. 22 years later, I'm the only foreigner. The rest of my architects are mainland Chinese educated people who have passports and travel and experience the world. So all I can tell you is that, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, but it's time for China to quit hiring foreign architects who come here with a suitcase and go home 3 days later and send back a sketch. That is not going to make Chinese architecture more Chinese. So we've got to, you know, maybe I'll lose work over this statement, but the younger generation of Chinese architects are ready to take the lead.
How will Chinese cities and countryside look like, say, 10 years from now?
Well, I think the most important thing that, and I will give credit to your president for this. I mean, for the first time in my 22 years, we're focusing on people, and it's people-centric architecture. In other words, we're designing cities for people. 20 years ago, they were designing cities for cars, and the traffic engineers were the master planners of the cities. Today, better city, better life. That was the slogan for the Shanghai Expo. And so, and I've done work in Beijing too, and I know that it starts with caring about people, not with caring about ideology or power or any of those things. Culture is a living thing, and it depends on people to create it. And all too often, we let our cities be designed by people who want us to consume culture, not create it. So if there's any hope for the future, it is in educating our young people to create, not consume. And we're not helped any. Right now, it's a struggle because social media is basically encouraging you to be a consumer, not a creator. And so I think architecture in the future needs to focus on creation, not
in a way, architects
so
are creators.
We should be the ones
Do you
that
expect
are designing our
the
buildings.
young generation of Chinese architects will be creative enough to make a change in the world?
Well, I think they already are, actually. I think you know, it took a long time. Once you go through a cultural revolution, you have to start over. And it's not like fashion or food. If you don't like the suit you're wearing, you can go to a store the next day and buy another one. But if you don't like the building you live in, you can't tear it down and build another one the next day. So it takes 2 or 3 generations of good architecture to develop a portfolio. And I think we're there now. I think the latest generation of young architects in China, they get great education, they travel now, they see the world, they bring ideas back with them. And I think in the future there will be less reliance on importing architecture, like the guy with the suitcase.
Yeah.
Comes to China for 3 days, goes home. So it's going to be, the future of China depends on the talents of the architects, of the Chinese mainland architects. And I teach every day. I'm not paid to teach, but that's what I do.
Yeah, you are a good teacher,
I have these
obviously.
young, bright, young people in my office, and every day I love going to work because I can teach them to be better architects, and they make better cities. And then I give a lot of presentations to local governments, to party secretaries, to the head of Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Dalian, Harbin, Xiamen, all these places, and people are listening now because people realize that if you want a better life, it starts with having a better place to live, and making some of those decisions yourself, not leaving it up to marketing people and real estate people to make those decisions for you. 100 years ago, no one lived in a house that they didn't build themselves.
Exactly.
And all that changed. So we have to get back towards that beginning where the people who live there help make the decisions about what it looks like, how it feels, and how it, my new philosophy is, if I look at a building, I judge the building by, did it make this city a better place? Not, is it the most beautiful building or the tallest building or the most expensive building, but did it contribute to making Shanghai or Beijing or Harbin a better city to live in? And it starts with leadership, but the leadership has to listen to the people, and they are now, much more than they did before. So I think the future's bright.
All right.
Bright.
On that optimistic note, I have to wrap up this interview. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been very enlightening. I hope I can meet you in person and talk about civilization and architecture. Thank you so much, Ben. And that's the first half of our interview with our American architect on civilization and culture and the city that they live in. Welcome back. As a carrier of culture, architecture has profound cultural imprint. So are foreign architects more likely to integrate into local culture or change it? And is there a need for Chinese to build their own confidence and their own styles in architecture? To find out more in the second half of the program, I'm pleased to be joined by Kai Sheng, CEO of Arcalia Architecture. So Kai Sheng, our guest Benjamin Wood earlier mentioned that the importance of cultivating Chinese architects with their own styles and characters. How would you characterize that? Are Chinese architects doing impressive jobs?
Yes. I think it's always important to have a domestic architects of China's own. And they are very good already, but I don't think there's necessarily a need for a deliberate cultivation. And China has come a long way. I remember in the mid-'80s when I was a student in college in China, there's really absolutely no notable modern architecture in the world stage. There's suddenly Imprint designed the Frequent Hill Hotel in Beijing, and I went
designed
to
by
Beijing. Imprint, yes. I went to Beijing to see it, and I couldn't get in because it was catered to the foreigners only. So my classmates and I had to scale the garden wall in the back with the architectural plan you had before. Can you believe that? So definitely have come a long way. And architecture is something that you cannot rely on, on campus, schooled on campus. It requires experience to see, to experience the architecture. Over the last 30 years, there's many Chinese students went abroad to study and to work overseas. And they went back to China, brought with them experience they have learned. And this definitely fosters a close connection to what's going on.
And I know that you started studying architecture in the States years ago. How did you start doing that? Is it difficult to adapt to a different culture, both culturally and probably professionally?
Yes, it was very different. When I was in college in China, and the critics and everything, we at that time, now everything has changed. We present our drawings and everything. We actually submit it. You don't see it until you get it back. And in schools in America, they actually the critique. So you have your drawing mounted on the wall. You explain and defend what you have done. So now we're doing that all over the place in China already for many years. But at the time, in the 80s, it was very different. And I was a TA in college in New York, teaching assistant. So I tried to, help to grade the papers and test. And some of the correct answer is anyone is correct. It basically fosters what your original thinking. It was a shock to me, And in studios and everything, you walk around and drink, cokes and all that. Very relaxed attitude.
And talking about the styles of architectures, now we see in cities, in Chinese cities, many architectures designed by well-known international architects. But also other people say it has been a testing ground for too many strange and eccentric ideas and visions. What do you think? What should be a Chinese city look like?
I think authenticity is the key. And I believe, I'm not sure about style is the right word. I think style in and on itself is meaningless. And It's architecture for me is not about the object. It's more about space and experience. And if you design something that stays true to the site and to the environment they are in, that will be a successful architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays in China, all the important commissions are won through competition. So it's not a competition of styles, I believe. It's more of a competition of the best solutions in a given site. As an example, we participated in a 5-week competition. We ended up winning, but I don't think the style, I don't even know what style it can be called. It's probably a solution that speaks best to its site. And horizontally and vertically, it's a twin office tower. It's at the base is different from what's on the top. 10 meter at the bottom or 240 meter at the top is a different context physically, and it affords different advantages. So a building responds to that.
But should a building also respond to the request of national identity and city identity? What does it mean for a building to have its own cultural imprint?
Yes, I think different genres require different things. I'll give you an example. There's a difference between Chinese client and American client. I think Chinese client emphasize more to the iconic images, especially the site is prominent.
Yeah.
Do
you understand their request?
Yes.
Because it's socially relevant for them.
Yes, absolutely. As a very good example is that we are fortunate to have won a commission to design the tallest tower in Shandong province. It's a set of 3 towers actually. It's on the seaside of Qingdao, called Haitian Center. A client wanted because the tallest tower in the province and in Qingdao by the sea, you have to reflect.
Yeah. I was inside that building once. That is very iconic, I should say. It stands tall there.
I'm sorry, it's not. It's just completed. It's just completed.
Yeah, I know. I was in the work construction site.
Oh, great, fantastic, wonderful, wonderful. Sorry, yeah, it's just a complete curtain wall, completely wrapped. Okay, that's great. At the same time, I think the Chinese clients are starting to look at the historical context, not just the latest shocking shapes and forms. In the same project, there was important historical building reside on the same site. The client wanted first, you need to reflect the spirit of Qingdao, the fact that we are by the sea, but at the same time want to pay some homage to what was there before. So what we did was that we took the original hexagon motif and start to rotate the northern tip and the southern tip, rotate with the incremental shift as it goes up, ascends to the top, and complete a rhythmic curve, echoing the wave of the sea. And the concept was the rhythm of the sea. I don't know if you could tell that from the outside.
I cannot.
3 waves. You will see once it's all completed and everything. So that's a good example of what's going on. The Chinese client definitely wants something speak to the city and to what is represent.
I know that it's a competitive field for architects. Obviously, you are doing projects here in China, and I presume you're also pursuing projects in the U.S. How Chinese architects, architects with Chinese background are doing in North America?
It's competitive everywhere,
Okay.
and I don't actually I don't walk around thinking of myself as a Chinese American or Chinese architect and all that. But you are who you are. You are imbued with what you have learned in the U.S. and experience. I was born and raised in China, of course, as you probably know. So it's always a part of you. In North America, similarly, as in China, the important commissions are gained through competition. We are doing that. For example, in LA, there's it was three hotels together, a major complex. We won the competition against some of the biggest names in America, and you basically using your trade, what you learned, and to compete. And of course, the three hotels eventually became two. So it should start breaking ground next year.
There are a lot of people, either they're Chinese or they are descendants of Chinese, working in America or in Europe. What do you think their cultural background and their ethnic lineage mean for them working there, and how can it be a bridge between two different peoples and cultures even?
Well, I don't know. I think I did my part helping this exchange and bridge by marrying my American wife 27 years ago. So that's the ultimate bridge.
A living example of bridge.
Yeah, exactly. I think just you don't walk around seeking to be a bridge per se. I think you just being yourself and carry out your days and reflecting your values, to be authentic. But by being yourself, you are a bridge, I think, for them to understand you are who you are. And I think this global interconnectivity really helps fosters opportunity to for mutual understanding of people of a different background and culture. And also think this mutual communication understanding probably will be realized more meaningful at the individual level, other than through the lens of a national identity,
All right. Thank you very much. Be authentic and be ready to connect. Thank you, Kai-sheng.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's our dialogue with architects. And thank you for watching Dialogue on CGTN.